Hi, I'm Val the Realtor. Welcome back to my channel. This week, we're going to do a quick rapid fire of 5 questions, specifically for the buyers that I frequently get. We're at the beginning of a new year, and it looks like it's going to be a good buying year. So today's episode, we're going to focus on the buyer. Okay, first question. And I get this question a lot. It's all about running the numbers. How much is the house worth? How much should I offer to pay? And at the end of the day, how much is this going to cost me monthly? Excellent questions. So the first one is, of course, you should always get a mortgage pre-approval, because really, at the end of the day, it's not the realtor that advises you on what you're comfortable spending or what you're capable of spending. It's your mortgage broker. I recommend using a mortgage broker that works amongst a bunch of different lenders and not one specifically from a bank. But if you have a really good relationship at your bank, feel free to use your bank mortgager. That's for sure an option too. The other big difference is, of course, as we've seen condo fees start to increase, if you take away the condo fee affordability in your monthly payment, all of a sudden the affordability on a house or a semi-detached or half duplex, as we like to call them in Western Canada, they suddenly become more affordable. So when you're looking for a pre-approval, look at your mortgage amount pre-approval, but then also ask for a secondary approval that tells you what you can afford if you buy a condo versus what you can afford to buy if you buy a house. Those two numbers may differ, and you may surprise yourself. I know I've often been surprised that you may actually be able to afford $50,000 or $75,000 more of a house if it's not a condo. So something to consider. Now, there are some additional resources that will go into more detail with some of these very specific questions that buyers have to tackle. The first thing, mortgages and running numbers. I highly recommend getting an app on your phone that does these calculations yourself. So if you're in a house, you can adjust your down payment, you can adjust the interest rates, they seem to keep changing. You can adjust your amortization and figure out your payments, as long as it falls within your budget guidelines. I personally use the Canadian Mortgage app. There's a lot of great apps out there. There's also ones that are put out by the banks, there's ones online, ones with your phone. You can even do some simple calculations. Well, I shouldn't say they're too simple, but you can do some calculations with your calculator on your phone to figure out affordability if you like. Some additional resources are right here on Val the Realtor's channel. I have a whole Real Estate 101 series that is in this link on a playlist. So you can go through and watch a whole series of videos on very specific questions, very specific topics that may interest the new or been a while in revisiting real estate market purchaser or seller. Now, there's some additional resources that I want to share with you. Sagen and the Canadian Mortgage Housing Corporation both have a lot of resources for buyers and sellers that are in the real estate market, and most major banks and some other lenders have some resources on their websites as well. Be sure to take a look and do your research, because it's important you understand all the terminology and the steps in the transaction. And lastly, probably the biggest resource of all is your realtor. Make sure you hire a realtor that you're going to enjoy working with, that is super fun, understands you, and that will help you see all your different property options. We want to see you get in the real estate market. We want to see you make money. We want to see you enjoy your investment, because everybody needs a place to live, and the greatest thing that can come is pride of ownership. I often get asked, what is the deposit versus what is the down payment? The deposit is the marginal amount of money that is going to be accompanying the offer, which we call in consideration of, for the purchase. This is going to account towards the purchase price, or in other words, towards your down payment. The down payment is the balance that you're going to be putting towards the house. Right now, you have to put a minimum of 5% down. So your down payment is 5% minus whatever the deposit was. The other sort of offshoot question that I get is, well, how much of a deposit do I have to accompany with my offer? That depends on the purchase price of the home that you're putting an offer in on. So the higher the price home, usually the larger the deposit. Generally speaking, right now, I haven't seen a deposit less than $5,000. So if you are looking to buy, it's a good idea to have $5,000 put aside, maybe just in a high yield interest account that you can get at quickly, so that if you do put in an offer, within that 72 hours, you can get that deposit in the form of a bank draft ready to go with your offer. So how to pay deposits. You can certainly do e-transfers, but the banks, of course, you can only e-transfer $2,500 or $3,000 at a time. So if your deposit is $10,000 or $15,000, you're not going to be able to transfer the deposit in sufficient time for what you need to meet for the contract. So we do wire transfers as well. Now, some brokerages, including Royal LePage Solutions, but I also know there's a couple other brokerages that offer this service, is they allow you to go direct deposit to the trust account at that particular branch, whether it's BMO or Royal Bank in the case of Royal LePage Solutions. And then they just ask you to take a picture of a copy of the receipt, of the deposit receipt, and they give you all the instructions. So if you're in Toronto, for example, and you're buying a property in Calgary and you need to get that deposit in within the next 48 hours, you can go to a branch in Toronto and direct deposit it. So it's actually quite easy. As far as the down payment goes, that is due and payable at your lawyer's appointment when you go in to sign your closing documents. So you have a little bit more time to get that together in case you're cashing out an investment, and the lawyer will advise you what that exact figure is, because it's going to be, like I said, your down payment, whatever that percentage is that you were shooting for, minus the deposit that you've already paid, but it might be plus a couple of things that you didn't count on, like an adjustment for property taxes. If you were closing mid-month and you have to pay 15 days condo fees, for example, there might be other adjustments that are necessary. And then of course you have your land title transfer fee that will be added in on top of that. So depending, and then their legal fees. So they're just going to give you one lump sum that you have to bring in terms of a bank draft at closing, which is usually at least a couple of days before the actual possession date on your contract, sometimes a week before. The next question I often get, and I'm frequently explaining, is about the walkthrough. So what is it? Do I always have to have a walkthrough? Should I get a walkthrough? And what's involved in the walkthrough? The walkthrough used to be something that was in the contract, in the purchase contract, allowing a buyer prior to closing, usually 24 hours prior, to do a walkthrough of the property to make sure it was in substantially the same shape it was as the day you put the offer in. It's no longer automatically in the contract. So if you want a walkthrough, make sure you tell your realtor to write in a clause, actually considered a term in the contract, that the buyer will be permitted a walkthrough within 48 hours prior to possession, usually with 12 to 24 hours notice. Depending on your closing date, sometimes it'll be even 72 hours. For example, a house that's maybe closing on a Monday, you might want to do the walkthrough before the weekend so that the sellers have the opportunity to remedy anything that you should find over the weekend that may be dirty, left behind. We will get to that, because part of the purpose of the walkthrough is to make sure that property is substantially as viewed the day you purchase the property. What happens at the walkthrough if you find things that maybe need some attention? Well, the first thing we do is we bring it up to the seller's realtor and ask if they can repair or remedy these deficiencies. Often it's little things and very inexpensive things, like they haven't removed the garbage or the house hasn't been thoroughly cleaned to your liking. Little things like that. And then we ask them to remedy those things to your satisfaction. And we may sometimes have to go back and look a second time, or in some cases we're asking for receipts to prove that the things were done. And of course, in this day and age of technology, we use our phones, we take pictures, and we'll send them to our buyers to say, hey, remember that dirty oven that you really was nauseating? Well, they cleaned it, and here's a picture of the clean oven. So that we know, because then the morning of closing, your lawyer's going to contact you and say, hey, did you do the walkthrough as the term in your contract under 9.3? And were you happy with it? Because if you were, I'm going to release funds. And if you weren't, we're going to hold a little bit of money back to make sure that you're absolutely happy. Another question that I get is repairs and maintenance. Whose responsibility are they? Well, during COVID, we saw a lot of requests from buyers to have the furnace cleaned, maintained, serviced, have the ducts cleaned, all that kind of stuff, and that certainly makes sense. We're starting to see that less and less. However, we still get a lot of requests from buyers to remedy things maybe that they found in the home inspection, or maybe things that they've noticed that they didn't notice the first time around. And it is okay to ask. It may not be done, but it is okay to ask. And this is where we hope that we have a seller and a buyer that are working cooperatively and collaboratively to have a win-win transaction. So for example, let's say you went into the house, they moved the furniture out, it's now empty, and you discovered there's a hole in the wall. That hole wasn't there before. And you talked to the seller, and the seller wasn't even aware that hole was there either. It was something that a child might have done and then moved his bed over to hide it. Maybe it was one of his little hiding spots. Well, now you have a buyer that bought a house that he wasn't aware there's a hole in the wall. And it may not even be a big hole, but it will require some professional tradesmen to come in and fix. So what do you do at closing? Well, there's a couple of options. The first, of course, is always let's speak to the seller, find out what happened, and see if there's a solution we can come to. And in many cases, the seller will either offer to patch the hole or have the hole patched for you within maybe the next 36 hours or so, depending on when it was discovered, how soon till closing time. The second option could be, if we don't have a seller and a buyer that are cooperative thinking, is the lawyers will get involved in the discussion. Photos may be taken, measurements, costs, and estimates to see how much it would be to remedy the hole in the wall. And then the lawyers may negotiate a settlement. They may say, hey, it's worth $250. They may say, you know what, the house needed work and it was being sold as is and it wasn't discovered during the home inspection and it's just drywall. Maybe there's no concession that is needing to be made. So it just depends on what it is and how cooperative the sellers and buyers want to work. There's another example that I can think of where, for example, there was a lot of old building and construction materials, pretty much garbage, that was left under a deck in the backyard. And believe it or not, these buyers, they came and they were looking everywhere, and all of a sudden they discovered there was all this essential debris underneath the deck. And they didn't want to inherit somebody else's garbage. They didn't want to pay for the run to the dump. So they immediately called their lawyer and said, there's a bunch of stuff here that we didn't ask for in our contract. And sure enough, we did not ask for any garbage left under the deck to be included in the sale. And we didn't think it was pertinent or useful. The sellers may have thought they were doing us a favor by leaving these items, but really it wasn't. And in the end, the lawyers just simply asked, either take it to the dump or we're going to have a $1,000 holdback. And it's amazing how quickly the sellers will have things removed to the dump when there's cash on the line. So at the end of the day, we always want to make sure the seller and the buyer feel happy in the transaction, and we want to make sure everything is handled fairly and according to the contract. That brings me to my last question, and probably the one that intrigues buyers the most, is closing day. First of all, closing day and possession day are pretty much synonymous. In Alberta, we always use closing at noon, and that's usually the given time. And the reason is because that's halfway through the day, right? Between midnight and midnight. But does closing actually have to happen right at noon? No, it does not. It's whenever the proceeds transfer. So it's important that you get insurance for the property on closing day and provide that proof to your lawyer. But know that the keys may come at 10 o'clock in the morning, or you may decide you want to work all day and you'll get the keys at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So what happens behind the scenes? Behind the scenes, your lender is preparing the money and sending it to your lawyer, the buyer's lawyer. The buyer's lawyer is double checking that all the money matches, all the statements and disbursements are done, and then they're going to send that money over to the seller's lawyer. But they're not going to do that until you've confirmed the walkthrough is to your satisfaction. They're going to make sure that you've confirmed all repair, maintenance, and any terms that were listed in the contract have been satisfied, and that all the goods included in your purchase contract were still on the premises and substantially in the same condition as viewed before they will release that money. Once you've got that quick phone call, it's usually around 9:30 in the morning, the proceeds will then be couriered over to the other lawyer's office, the seller's lawyer. When the seller's lawyer receives it, he's going to make sure that it satisfies all the conditions the exact same way the buyer's lawyer did. So there's all these little checkups along the way. Once the seller's lawyer has received proceeds, the seller's lawyer will contact me, the realtor, and let me know the money has been received, the keys are released. Then I will let my sellers know, if I'm representing the sellers, to say congratulations, your transaction is complete, and whatever arrangements you made with your lawyer, the proceeds are going to be transferred. However, if you're on the buyer's side, that's where it gets really exciting. I reach out to you and say, hey, guess what? The keys are released. It's a done deal. When did you want to meet at the house? Now, sometimes we set the time ahead of time based on someone's schedule, or sometimes I get some very eager buyers that are ready to go right at noon, and we do set the clock and we go right at noon for the key release. I've had keys released at all different times of day. The earliest release has been about 9:15, 9:30 in the morning, where there was no lender involved. It was a cash sale. It was closing on a Tuesday, which is a slow day for closing, and the lawyers weren't that busy, so it got really done really fast, and that was an exciting day. We were all shocked to have keys released so early. I've also had keys not be released on closing day. Sometimes there's a hiccup. Maybe the real property report didn't meet compliance. Maybe the sellers left a little bit too much stuff that we had to hold back and wait. Sometimes the lender is slow releasing money. Sometimes that happens on a Friday. Sometimes it happens on a holiday. There's different circumstances, but it's rare, but it can happen where closing may roll into the next day. If that happens, The buyer may be on the hook for interest payments, even though they haven't taken possession of the house. So please make sure that you are prepared and that you have both a realtor and a lawyer that are double checking everything on that morning of closing to make sure you don't run late, because the buyer does have a responsibility to make sure the proceeds are transferred to the seller's lawyer's trust account by noon of closing day. But good realtor, you shouldn't have to worry. Thanks for watching this week on Val the Realtor. I'm so happy you tuned in. I put out a video each week and I would love it if you would subscribe, comment, share, and of course, tell me what you would like to watch this year. We're going into a fascinating and pivotal year in the real estate market, and I look forward to bringing you new content each and every week. See you next time.